problem seminar. So we are very happy today to have Pierre Millien from Institut Langevin, an expert on ultrasound imaging, which will be talking about mathematical frameworks for speed reconstruction in medical and ultrasound imaging. So thanks so much, Pierre, for giving the talk.
Um, so, Hello everyone. So I'm very happy to be invited to talk to the seminar and to present to you some recent work we did. So this is work that was done in collaboration with Jocelyn Garnier from École Polytechnique, Laure Géovangeli from ENSTA, and a lot of the theory presented here was done during Quentin Gobsfer PhD thesis. And some of the numerical simulations that I will show at the end are done by Émile Parolin, who works at INRIA and who's a specialist of simulation of solution for Helmholtz equations. And so just to present like really quickly myself, so I work for the CNRS as a mathematician, but I am physically embedded in a physics lab. So I work at Institut Langevin, which is a lab that specializes in waves and images, basically. And so the work that I will present today is some theoretical and mathematical modeling work that was done, that was inspired by some experiments that are done in the lab. I will explain a bit more, but this is just for the general context. So before we start going in with all the theory, I want to start by just recalling very quickly some basic facts about ultrasound imaging that I think is important to have in mind to understand some of the modelization choices that we make. So the current state of the art, and so for ultrasound imaging, is that you have a medium that you want to probe, and you have some transducer that can emit and receive ultrasound wave. And the standard way to get the image is to send some excitation wave inside the medium, and then you measure on the probe all the backscattered echoes, and then using an algorithm that in the physics community it's called the delay and sum, but it's the same principle as a backpropagation or a virtual time reversal if you want. You can basically relocate where the echoes were generated. And if you do this for every pixel, you get an image. And so basically the key thing, if you want to be able to build an image, is to have some space-time correspondence, okay? The echoes are all measured in the time domain, and the goal of the image is to assign them to a source point, if you want, somewhere in the medium. And to get that space-time correspondence, how is it possible in practice? So in practice, something that is important to keep in mind for medical ultrasound imaging is that in soft tissues, the speed of sound, it doesn't vary too much. So let's say roughly around like 10% around the parameters of water, basically. And the soft tissues, they are what we call weakly scattering. We'll define later what it is, but basically you have two very reasonable hypotheses that people do, is that the speed of sound is constant and that you are in a single diffusion regime. So it's also called the Born approximation if you want, it's the same thing. And if you have those two hypotheses, then there is no problem. You have a space-time correspondence. However, this constant speed of sound, I mean, for the last 50 years or something like this, there has been a lot of improvement on the probes, the signal processing, the bandwidth. I mean, all the technical aspect of it has progressed a lot. And so now those two hypotheses are kind of the limiting factor, if you want, the bottleneck for the improvement of ultrasound imaging. And so there is a big, right now, people are interested in accessing directly the speed of sound from the ultrasound measurements. So, of course, this would lead to improved in the signal to noise ratio, the contrast, the resolution of the image. And the most important part, maybe also, is that it can also be used as a diagnosis tool. This is what this is called a biomarker, right? So it can be an indicator of a pathological state, the speed of sound in a tissue. And okay, that doesn't sound very exotic to find the speed of sound in a medium, but something that you have to keep in mind also is that the signal is always a backscattered field. So you don't have access to transmission data. Okay, it's not very easy to measure travel time in medical ultrasound imaging. So that speed of sound reconstruction, it's not so easy. And then there is another specificity for ultrasound images. It's how they look. Okay, so if you look, this is an image of a liver. Okay, that was obtained in the lab by one of the former PhD students. And basically, what if you look at what the backscattered signal is so backscattering is generated by the discontinuities in the acoustic parameters of the medium. And in soft tissues, what happens is you have these discontinuities, they appear at a scale that is much smaller than the wavelength. And so the order of magnitude is you can have several hundreds of scatterers in a wavelength. Okay. So there is no isolated strong targets or things that you can use to calibrate your image. The image is mainly speckle. Okay. This is the really the two main things is we have access to we have a reflection geometry and everything is noise. And the experiments that were led in my lab by the team of Alexandre Aubry and Matthias Fink is they managed to basically introduce a quality criterion on the image, exactly like what is done in adaptive optics, for instance. But that works on speckle type of image. And the idea behind our work was to provide a strong, rigorous mathematical model to support some of the claims that they had and also quantify some of the effects that they observed experimentally. And so I can't sum up 15 years of research in in experimental ultrasound, but the key ingredient in their method is they have introduced a local quality criterion on the image. Basically, they maximize the brightness of the point spread function. And the really important thing I mean, their main achievement is that they are able to extract this quality criteria directly from statistical properties of the image. So they don't have access directly to a point spread function, but they can extract it directly from the speckle. So this is really the important thing, and this is what we want our mathematical model to understand to show. And so if we switch now to the mathematical problems that you have, if you want to study this, first of all, you need a mathematical model for measurements because actually, so if you ask physicists and ultrasound specialists what is it that you measure when you do an ultrasound image, they will all tell you the reflectivity. But the reflectivity of a tissue is not really well defined. The definition of the reflectivity is more or less what you measure. It's not, there is no, we couldn't find any quantitative relations between the physical parameters of the medium, let's say the density and compressibility, and the actual ultrasound measurements in soft tissue. So you need a model that can describe the wave that is scattered by an object that has a microstructure and that is random. And then the second main mathematical problem is more for the inverse problem is, okay, can you extract these statistical properties from just a single image? So you need to prove some sort of stationarity properties on the imaging function. So these are really the main two things that I will try to do. So the first part will be really having a model for the measurements. So to link quantitatively the physical parameters in the medium and the measured field. And in the second time, we will analyze the imaging function and show that there is indeed some stationarity, local stationarity, and that it's possible to extract some statistical quantities just from one single realization. So now we can dive in with the equations. So this is a very standard, right? So the medium that we want to image is going to be modelized by a bounded object, okay, which we call D. And this bounded object, we assume it's embedded in a homogeneous infinite background. And the object has a structure and space varying coefficients. And the propagation of the wave is described by a divergence form Helmholtz equation with a radiation conditions. This is really not nothing exotic. And so the physical parameters, they are homogeneous outside of D and they can vary very quickly inside D. And so usually A is the inverse of the density and N is the inverse of the compressibility. So it's a model for the physical parameters of the medium. And then you have this, we define the wave number, K naught. Okay, this is very standard Helmholtz things. And so the first thing that you have to ask yourself, because we're trying to describe soft tissues, is what is a good model for A and N? Like what do we put for A and of X and A and N of X if we want to model a soft tissue? So of course, the soft tissues, they are very, very complex. I mean, we're not going to be describing the compressibility and density of soft tissue at a cellular level over a domain that is 10 centimeters of diameter. So we cannot model directly the soft tissue. But there is something that's very interesting and that is much easier to model is the tissue mimicking phantoms. So these are experimental apparatus that are used by physicists, experimental physicists, to mimic the behavior of soft tissues. And they are much simpler. They are basically lots of small scatterers densely embedded in some background. And what happens is that actually when you use this type of things, you get measurements that are very, very similar to what you get if you image, let's say, a liver. So this is what we're going to try to model. And experimentally, when they want to change the speed of sound in the phantoms, they change the repartitions of the scatterer. They put more, less, or something like that. And so just looking at the problem, we already got some strong requirements for the mathematic model that we want to use. So it has to be random because we're not going to be describing one by one the position of hundreds of thousands of scatterers. Of course, it has to be stable with respect to the size and number of scatterers. We want to do some asymptotic analysis, and it has to be able to infer some macroscopic quantities like the speed of sound directly from the microstructure. And so a very natural way to do this is to use stochastic homogenization techniques. So I'm not going to do a full course on stochastic homogenization, and it's not especially my area of expertise. This is more Jocelyn Garnier and Laure Gerangigli, who are really specialists of this, but I can give a quick idea of how it works. And if you want to just remember one thing, it's this picture. So basically, it's very similar to periodic homogenization. So you have a medium with scatterers of size 1, and then you rescale with using a small parameter epsilon. And here I showed you a picture of what happens when epsilon gets smaller and smaller. And so this is model for small scatterers, but really the main difference with other models for small scatterers, like for instance, coupled dipole, coupled monopoles, Foldilax, all of this type of methods to study the scattering by small scatterers, is that here, the smaller the scatterers get, the more they are. Okay, the volume fraction they occupy in the medium is constant, regardless of their size, or, almost constant, right? And um, and so this is the main philosophy is that we have small scatterers, but there are many. They are really densely embedded. And stochastic homogenization, the goal and the principle is to separate the scales, the macroscopic scale from the microscopic scale, and what is deterministic from what is random. And the way to do this is exactly like in periodic homogenization. Uh, we want to do an asymptotic expansion of the field with respect to this scaling size parameter, epsilon. And so you introduce an ansatz, and you have this zero order field, and then you have a slow and a fast variable, exactly like in periodic homogenization. And this determine the first field, U0, we call it the coherent field. Okay, so it solves a deterministic wave equation with effective coefficients. And then you have the higher order fields, who still depends on the microstructure and of course the coherent field. So this is the random part, if you want, of the field. And so the coherent field, what does it solve? So it basically solves a transmission problem for Helmholtz equation, but now the quickly oscillating coefficients inside the medium have been replaced by A star and N star, which are what we call the homogenized coefficients. So they are constant inside the medium, and they are deterministic, right? So for instance, for N star, it's easy, it's simple. It's the expectation of the random coefficient inside the obstacle. And then for the coefficient A star, it's a bit more complicated. You have to introduce a corrector. The corrector is the solution of a Laplace equation. It's also similar to periodic homogenization, but now it's defined in the whole space instead of a unit cell. Okay. And also something notable is that A can be a matrix. So even if the microstructure is completely isotropic, which is always the case for ultrasound propagation, at the macro scale, you can exhibit some anisotropy, which has been experimentally observed. For instance, in muscles, we know that muscles are not isotropic, and a good way to mathematically, a rigorous way to exhibit anisotropy is to go through homogenization of the Helmholtz equation. So those correctors, for those who know a little bit of maybe who come from electromagnetic background, it can be seen as some sort of collective polarizability. Okay, so when you have when epsilon is going to zero, you're putting infinitely many small dipoles next to each other, and so you have collective near field effects. And the correctors, they kind of, I think that's my interpretation. They modelize the near field effects. Okay, and then you have a classic theorem that tells you that you have a weak convergence to the homogenized field. Now, this is not enough to describe the measurements, and I will show you why by looking at, okay, what would be by looking at the representation formula. It's a Lippmann-Schwinger integral equation. Okay, so just to recall, we are interested in having values of the field outside of our obstacle with the microstructure. So the good way, nice way to do that is to use an integral representation. And if you look at the integral representation, you can see that you need to have a good approximation of the field U epsilon inside of the domain, but also of its gradient. That's because we have contrast in the gradient in the equation. And if you look at what the expansion gives us, you can see that if you want a zero order approximation of the gradient, you need a first order approximation of the field because of the fast variable. And so just having the homogeneous field is not going to be enough to describe the measurements. And so we need to go one order higher. So we need to introduce the first order field. So it depends on the corrector, on the a coherent field, okay? And then it's possible to show that you have a H1 convergence inside the obstacle of this approximation of the field towards the exact solution. So I will not get into the proof of that at all. This is a very long paper that should come out in ARMA very soon. It's been approved. But really the important thing is that the techniques that we use to prove this, they build up on a really a bunch of very recent results on stochastic homogenization of the Laplace equation. And this is yeah, we we used a lot of non-trivial results coming from the team of Gloria, Otto, Duerenx, Nekam, and Armstrong, Kusi-Amura. And also, as it's a transmission problem, you have a breach of stationarity at the boundary of the domain for the coefficients. So you need to also introduce some boundary correctors. And for this, we applied similar techniques to what Shari Moscow is doing in periodic homogenization, but there are a few technical differences, but it's the same spirit. And now we can use this approximation to get a representation of the scattered field. So usually, what is used in medical ultrasound imaging is a type of Born approximation. I told you it's a single diffusion. It's what they call single diffusion regime. And here, if we plug in our approximation into the Lippmann-Schwinger integral representation formula, we get something a bit, which is at the same time very similar, but still has a few differences. So the first one is that the incident field is now replaced by a coherent field. Then the second part is that the gradient it has to be it's a bit more complicated, and now the contrast is not with respect to the parameters outside the medium, but with respect to the effective parameters in the medium. And the last thing is that you have to replace the green function of the free space by a homogenized green function. So the homogenized green function it's like a coherent green function. Okay, it solves the Helmholtz equation, but with the effective parameters inside of the medium. So if you want, you can see this approximation of the field as some sort of generalization of the Born approximation. So the Born approximation, you need the contrast to be small with respect to L infinity norm. With this, the contrast is not small, neither in L infinity norm nor even in L2 or L1 norm. But it's weak for a weak norm, because basically the contrast is weak because the coefficients are oscillating very fast. And so, yeah, I think it's reasonable to see as some sort of extension. It's still the same spirit as the Born approximation, but for a weaker topology, if you want. And now you can use this representation now outside of the medium and show that you have a pointwise convergence of this representation. So this is a good representation for our measurements. Now I will show you some simulations just so you see what they look like. So these ones are from Quentin Goffer from his PhD thesis. So what we are looking at here. So D is the obstacle where the microstructure is. Okay. We look at it in a sphere and we put some Dirichlet to Neumann operator to deal with the finite part of the domain. And there is a plane wave coming from the left. And as you can see, okay, so this is the total field, the first one, and then you have the coherent field. And you can see the coherent field it sees a constant medium, but with different parameters, right? With effective parameters. Here you can see the wavelength is almost doubled or something like that inside the medium. And then if you remove that coherent field, you get the difference between the exact field and this zero order approximation. You get the incoherent field, which is what we're interested in. This is the measurements. And the first order approximation, just to show you, it looks the same. So of course, this one is still random, right? It depends on the microstructure, but this is what we want. And then you can, this was a lot of work from Quentin. He obtained the convergence slopes for these approximations, and the slope are the same as theoretically predicted. And now, using that, we can get a nice measurement model. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is simplify a bit to deal with the inverse problem. We are going to simplify a little bit the equation and now assume that we don't have contrast in density, only in compressibility. This is generally the model that is used by physicists in ultrasound imaging. And okay, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's very reasonable to argue that this is what you can. This is a good model because of the reflection geometry. When you have small scatterers, it's difficult in reflection to differentiate a small dipole from a small monopole. And so, assuming that all the scatterers are monopole, is what has been a lot done in the physics literature. We've seen before that they are not exactly equivalent, but this is a reasonable model, at least for a first step, to understand, to analyze the imaging function. So this simplifies a lot our coherent field. Okay, it's just Helmholtz equation with a different wave number inside and outside of the obstacle. The effective index is the expectation of the random index. And once you have the effective index, you can have an effective wave number and an effective speed of sound. Okay, and this is what we want to reconstruct, this effective speed of sound. So now we can introduce also an homogeneous gain function, which is very similar to the coherent field, except there is the source term somewhere. And then you have a very nice representation for the backscattered field as a convolution of the coherent field, coherent gain function, and contrast with respect to the effective parameters. So if you look, it looks very similar to what people use in usually classically in medical ultrasound, which is the Born approximation. But this is valid in a much larger frame. Okay, this is here you don't. The expression on the right does not imply a single diffusion regime. It's the contrast can be large in L infinity or L1 norm. Now let me show you what type of model we're going to have. So here is a on the left is a numerical simulation of a medical ultrasound experiment. So we have a medium that has a lot of small scatterer and one really strong one. And then basically you fire up a spherical wave from one of the transducer and you measure the backscattered wave everywhere on all the other transducer. And so if you do that for every incident wave possible, you get a measurement matrix. Okay, so the measurement matrix is the scattered field at the reception point XR when the emission was done at XE. Okay, we define also a bandwidth B, and okay, so we have an effective speed of sound. The probe here is just a little segment, and the imaging functional is very simple. It's a backpropagation functional. So what do? You take your measurement, you time reverse them. So if you're in the frequency domain, you conjugate them. And then you backpropagate using the green function with the correct speed of sound. And this is the type of image on the right that you would get for the type of measurements on the left. And And this is the functional that we want to analyze. Okay, so the first thing is to plug in our measurement model in our imaging function. As soon as you do that, uh, you find that the imaging function, it can be written as a convolution between a contrast. So this is kind of what they call the reflectivity, and a convolution kernel. Okay, and this convolution kernel is the point spread function of the imaging system. So it's basically the integral over all the bandwidth of the scalar product between two green functions. So this is very classical. Now, what we want to do is we want to analyze the imaging function in order to reconstruct the speed of sound. So we also need to understand how the imaging function and these kernels behave when you have an incorrect speed of sound. So, of course, if you have an incorrect speed of sound, let's say you don't know what C star is, the measurements, they don't change. They don't depend on, on any hypothesis. They are what they are. But now, the convolution kernel will change because you're going to use an incorrect green function in the backpropagation. And most of our analysis is going to be studying this kernel when you have a mismatch between C and C star. And so the main thing that we want to prove is that it's possible to extract some statistical properties of the imaging function with one realization. So it's the stationarity. And I will give you just an idea of how we get this stationarity by studying the convolution kernel. Okay, so now let me denote by gamma. Gamma is the dependency on the randomness of the medium. So I'm sorry for everyone who does probabilities. I know it's usually omega, but omega was already taken. It's the frequency. So here we call it gamma. And then we consider a small spatial shift somewhere on the image, okay? And this spatial shift has to be much larger than the typical scatter size, but smaller than the general wavelength that the imaging system is operating on. Okay, the central wavelength at the middle of the bandwidth. And the main result that we are able to prove is that there is the stationarity of I. So that means that if you look what happens at the pixel Z and realization gamma, if delta Z is in the correct scaling, if you look at what happens in Z plus delta Z, so a small shift in the image, it's like looking a different medium. It's like looking another, for a realization, gamma prime, approximately. And we can control the error that we are doing. And so this is the main theorem that we want to prove. Okay, like this we can access statistics. And where does it come from, and what is the link with this convolution kernel? So the first thing we do is we write what happens when we look at some pixel Z and then some pixel Z plus delta Z, so not too far. If you write it with just like this, and when you're doing an ultrasound image, your backscatter decodes, they come from all the domain. So there's not much you can say. But actually, when you look at the convolution kernel, okay, so here you fix some pixel and you look at f of zy as a function in the medium. You can see that you get this point spread function is very concentrated at one point. It's almost zero everywhere in the domain, and it's over order one in a small area that usually is called the focal spot. And just, okay, assume we know some stuff about this, but just intuitively, now, what does it say? It says that actually, when you're looking at some pixel Z, there is only a small part of the physical domain that is actually contributing to the image at the pixel Z. And so you can replace in the integrals, later we'll do it rigorously, but you can replace in the integral by the integral on the focal spot. And then if you just have a small area that's actually contributing in the medium, if we here I drew this focal spot, basically what happens is when you shift the pixel, you shift a little bit the focal spot. And if you look at the restriction of the medium in this focal spot, when you shift it a little bit, if the medium is stationary, then it's like looking at a different realization. And this is where the stationarity comes from. It comes from the fact that when you move a little bit the focal spot, if the scalings are all right, if the scatters are small enough, and if the medium decorrelates fast enough, it's like looking at another realization. And now, okay, we have some tasks to do. We have to first give a mathematical definition of the focal spot, and then we have to quantify the size, the position, and also what happens when there is a mismatch. And what does this focal spot becomes if you make a mistake in the speed of sound. So the focal spot. So here we use a L1 energy definition for the focal spot. We said this is where most of the L1 energy is of the point spread function. In the physics community, it's standard to use level sets for to define. So usually in the ultrasound community, people we call the focal spot the 3 dB level set for the point spread function. Here, for what we are trying to do, this L1 definition is nicer, especially when you make a mistake in the speed of sound. The kernel is not. It can have local maxima, so the level sets are not the. For practical reasons, we define it like this. And really, if you want to interpret what is the focal spot at a pixel z is the part of the domain, is the y's in D that actually contribute to the pixel z. And so, what do they look like? If you have the correct speed of sound, it's in the middle, and then I plotted what the point spread function looked like for a 10% mistake in the speed of sound, which is what we're kind of expecting in the applications. And this is what they look like, these focal spots. And now we want to quantify a bit their size. So of course, in the case where you know the correct speed of sound, this has been studied a lot. It's very classical. There's absolutely nothing exotic here. We know that the transverse dimension of the focal spot depends on the numerical aperture and wavelength. Okay, it's classic Rayleigh limit. And for the axial dimensions of the focal spot, they depend on the bandwidth. Now the question is what happens for the other two cases? Okay, can we quantify a bit what's happening? So the first thing is that for a fixed pixel, when you change the speed of sound, you don't focus at the good spot anymore. So the first thing is the focal spot moves around. This is the main effect. Then, if you look, the height of the peak is much decreased. Okay, it's very spread out, and of course the size is increased. And so we're gonna have to analyze everything to understand these effects, to quantify them. And so the general idea is these are not necessarily easy computations, but they're kind of you don't need a powerful theoretical tool to analyze this point spread function. If you look at what it is, and it's mainly a high frequency analysis. Okay, so if you can look at the phase of the point spread function, that of the term that's inside the integral. The amplitude, they don't really matter. And actually, the phase is easily described. Huh? It's you go. It's the travel time. It's the difference of travel time at speed c star and speed c. And basically, what you can expect. This is how usually the focal spots are studied. Is at some frequency omega, the focal spot is going to be the region that satisfied some geometric constraint. And so if you want to do that, not a bit less formally, you need to introduce some asymptotic parameter to describe the fact that the frequency becomes large. So it corresponds to reality, right? In reality, when you do an ultrasound image, you have a domain that's about 10 centimeters, right? And so you have several hundreds of wavelengths in the domain. So it's really a high frequency problem, multi-scale problem. The scatterers are very small, but the domain is very large. And so we introduce a regime that's called the paraxial asymptotic regime. And really it actually corresponds to what's used in practice. And using this, we can use stationary phase arguments and things like that to analyze the focal spot. So the first thing you need to do is to find first the center. And finding the center, um, once you have found the center of the focal spot, you can write an asymptotic expansion with this small parameter, which is 1 over the frequency, and get a nice expansion of these type of travel times. And when you do this, you can characterize exactly where it is. So the center, it moves linearly in the axial direction when you make a mistake on the speed of sound, and it moves as the square of the error in the speed of sound transversally. This is because of this paraxial approximation. Everything is small angles, and so okay, these computations are a bit tedious, so I don't want to write them, but you can get an explicit formula. Doesn't really matter what it is, but it's possible to get one for the point spread function. And this function G is something that appears all the time in imaging, and describes this point spread function. So let's not spend too much time trying to interpret everything, but once you have this, you can really study it to find you have a nice expression when you look at what's happening at the center of the focal spot. And you can also find the size and the shape of the focal spot by doing an asymptotic expansion around that center. And so, okay, it looks a bit complicated, but it's just I showed it just to show that that is possible to get it. And then once you have this asymptotic expansion of the phase, you can have the size of the focal spot, which is, sorry, it's given here by the coefficient in the asymptotic expansion. So we know it is of size eta in the axial direction and square root of eta in the transverse direction. So this is what we observe. There is a wide spreading in the transverse direction and not too much change in the axial direction. And then once you have this, okay, you can, like I said, you can basically replace since the integral on all the domain when you write the imaging function by just the contribution of the focal spot. And now you can see how you can, if you compute the statistical variance of the imaging function, it's pretty much proportional to the local average of the point spread function. And so this is the trick that allows you to extract the point spread function from the random image. So you have this random image, and if you find the variance, the local variance, then this is proportional to the point spread function. And the point spread function is much brighter at the correct speed of sound and much smaller at the wrong speed of sound. So basically, what this theorem tells you is that the speckle brightness is an indicator of the quality of the image. And you can build an estimator, okay? So just the speed of sound that maximize the speckle variance is the correct speed of sound for the image. And of course, as we explained before, even if this is statistical average, by just look, shifting a little bit on the image, you can access it from just one realization. So let me show you some numerical simulations. So these are numerical simulations done by Émile Parolin. So this is the medium. As you can see on the insert, on the top left of the insert, you can see the wavelength. So it's very small compared to the size of the domain. And there's a lot of scatters. Okay, here I think it's 150K. Okay, so this is for the technicals. The way that Emil solves this is using domain decomposition. Otherwise, this is too big. It's not possible to do directly. So he has a whole expertise on that. How to compute the solutions of Helmholtz equation in large domains like this. And then you can plot, this is the absolute value of the scattered field. Okay, I'm going through this random medium. And okay, this is what happens. Now, I'm on the right side, I show you the actual estimator. So what are we looking at? We build this matrix, okay, that is on the, so each column is done with one specific speed of sound, okay? So the horizontal axis is the relative error on the speed of sound with respect to C star. So in the middle, we have the correct speed of sound. And each row is the image done in a different pixel in a small area. Okay, so you can see on the insert. So we pick a bunch of pixels that are close to each other, and then we basically plot the absolute value, the square of the absolute value of the value at this pixel, but for a bunch of different speeds. And as you can see, statistically, it's much brighter. It's still random, but it's much brighter when you are near the correct speed of sound. And our theorem, what does it tell you? It tells you that the variance is approximated by the spatial average of this. So if you sum over all the lines, what do you get? You get something like this, an estimator that really has a sharp maximum at the correct speed of sound. So here I show you just the most simple estimator that they build, is the one based on variance, but they have a whole zoology of estimators, and we also got models for them. And this is just to show you, I wanted to show you two curves before we end. So the curves on the left, these are all obtained through our model. These are numerical simulations. So they're obtained via the stochastic homogenization and our measurement model for the ultrasound. And the one on the right were obtained during a PhD thesis of Flavien Bureau, and they are experimental curves, okay, in actual tissues. And so I just wanted to show that, okay, this model, it doesn't seem completely crazy. We get very similar type of curves that it seems, at least I think, that this is a convincing case that the model describes somehow accurately what's happening in soft tissue. So really, if you have few message is that first thing, stochastic homogenization, it's a good tool to actually study the acoustic behavior of soft tissues because they are multi-scale and microstructure and random, and so it's an effective tool to do that. Then, when you're doing imaging, even if the measurements they come from all the domain, once you have done the backpropagation, there is only a small area that contributes to a given pixel, even if you have an incorrect speed of sound. That area, it can be completely described. Okay, it's a bit heavy computation, but no problem. And if your medium is locally stationary, then the image is locally stationary. So you can extract those statistical properties with just one realization. And now, okay, what are the perspectives? Because here what we did is just reconstruct a homogeneous effective speed of sound. Of course, the next step is to reconstruct some more complex mediums. And so right now we're working on layered mediums. So you have two mediums with different scatter repartitions. So they have different effective properties. And we're also looking what happens if the background is smoothly varying. Okay, this is also yeah, it's a different problem. And yeah, the main difficulty is for layered medium to take into account the refraction effects. Then, so this is for the speed of sound mapping. Then, of course, the study of the imaging function that I showed you, we remove the contrast in the density. And then we know that there are some cases where you can observe some phenomenons that you would not see if there is no contrast in the density. For instance, the anisotropy in muscles or stuff like that. So we want to also incorporate this in the imaging function and see if there are some ways to discriminate if the signal is coming from the divergence term or the zero order term. In the far field, it's difficult because they look very similar in the far field. And this is a problem that interests a lot the physicists. My guess is that it's not possible. Not with the reflection geometry. And we can discuss if someone is interested. And of course, also there is here we only remove the constant speed of sound hypothesis. Like what happens if you go one order higher for the scattered field, you take into account like double diffusions and also the propagation in solids. This is very important for transcranial imaging because as soon as you try to do ultrasound images inside the skull it's not a soft tissue. You have shear waves, trapped waves. I mean, it's completely different beast. So we're also trying to see what happens with if we can incorporate these elastic waves. And so that's it for my talk. And thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or remarks, I will be happy to discuss.
Great. Thank you so much for a very nice talk, Pierre. So the floor is open for questions. Please unmute yourself and ask questions if you have questions.
Thank for the talk. I have a naive question.
There's no naive question.
Yes. So if you, from your measurement to get this C star or
Yeah.
N star, how does that help you on imaging?
Okay. No, that's a good question. So basically, if you have like most commercial imaging ultrasound devices, they have a standard value for the speed of sound, which is, let's say, whatever, 1550 meters per second or 1600 meters per second, but it's fixed. And so, of course, the speed of sound is not the same when you're imaging a liver or breast or for gynecologic exams. And so the idea of this method is that you do the measurements and then you run this algorithm that finds the effective speed of sound. And then you compute the image with the correct speed of sound. And once you do that, you get a nice improvements in the images, a lot in terms of contrasts. So for instance, okay, there is especially in ultrasound when in obstetrics, you have to measure some quantities directly from the image. So, like for instance, the spacing between in French it's called clarté nucale. I have no idea what's the English name for that, but they measure some geometrical quantities on the image, and this will give you if the baby has some risks of a disease or something like that. And these quantities, I mean, if you were doing the images with the incorrect speed of sound, you're going to aberrate and distort some of the shapes that are in the image, and you introduce an error in the in this diagnosis. So most of the case, it might be a false, I mean, a false alert because, and but for instance, this is a direct application. Yeah, for obstetrics, you need to be able to measure in centimeters the area of some of the feature of the features. And if you have an incorrect speed of sound, so for instance, if you have a patient that has a bigger layer of fat, the speed of sound in the layer of fat is much different actually than in water. So you get some aberrations. I mean, there is a doctor who told me that he had a case in his unit that had with an obese patient, and they had undetected twins for like several weeks, and they didn't realize there was two babies because yeah, ultrasound imaging, that's the miracle, is it works, but it actually doesn't work that well. The images are not so beautiful, and you need years and years of training to be able to read them. And so yeah, using the correct speed of sound will improve the quality of the image. And in a second time, it's also a diagnosis tool. For instance, in the liver, if the speed of sound is higher, I think, if the liver is stiffer, it's a sign of steatosis or something like that. I mean, and there are plenty of examples like that. I don't know them all, but like this quantity has an interest in itself. And also, if you put the correct speed of sound, you get better image with more contrast and smaller focal spots, so better resolution, things like that. But
Yeah, I can.
but it needs to be done with a more complex. The physicist, the experimentalist in my lab, they do it with more complex stuff than just one parameter. But, one effective speed of sound. They reconstruct it locally. So they still use this this method, but they find a local speed of sound.
Yeah, I can see this distortion of shape or
Mm.
distance wrong, like location. Will this help the resolution?
A little bit, not too much. But when you have a mixed, I mean, an incorrect speed of sound, the focal spot is a bit distorted, especially its lateral. With an image, it's easier. Oh, no, it was after. Sorry. I will find. But the focal spot is wider, so it
Mm.
degrades the every yeah you get. I mean, it depends on what you call resolution, but if you call the resolution the minimum distance that you need to have to separate two different scatter on an image, if the focal spot is larger, then the resolution is a bit degraded as well.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other last questions for Pierre? Otherwise, let's thanks Pierre once again. This was perfect timing, just at the hour.
Yeah.
For a great talk.
Thank you very much for having me. And if any of you have some questions that pop up later, like feel free to write to me. Yeah.